Unfortunately, the industry confuses the layperson. And we think there's this ideal or this perfect. Here's what's ideal.
Yeah, she's never broken a bone. She's fallen many times. She's fallen off a bike and she always got back on without anything broken. I mean, she wasn't like fit, but she was a strong woman.
Willpower is a bullshit term.
But also activates GLP-1. It does this very similar thing to what these GLP-1 drugs work on. And personally, when I started taking it, within 2 months, I started to notice a drop in appetite.
Maybe his ego will live forever, but I'm not sure the body will make it.
Welcome back to the 90% Healthy podcast. Donna and I are excited to dive into something that has been talked about a lot the past couple of years, and a lot of money has been spent on it. Yet there's a lot of unknowns, which are starting to get unearthed. Obviously, we're talking about the GLP-1 craze, the drugs that are promising you to lose the weight that you've been struggling to lose for a long time, or for vanity reasons in certain populations. But we wanted to talk about a few things that it's maybe not the first time we're seeing a trend like this. And we wonder how long it lasts once, especially we start to understand some of the science that is happening to our body long term. Kick us off with some of the things that maybe our listeners don't know about GLP-1 drugs and what a lot of us don't know yet.
So let's just talk about what GLP means. So GLP stands for what's called glucagon-like protein or peptide, and there's a receptor. So anytime we have a system in our body, there's usually three elements. There's what's called a ligand. This is the molecule that floats around the system that lands on the second part as a receptor. When that ligand lands on the receptor, it activates proteins and makes our bodies do things. So this can be proteins. It's just, there's there's literally millions and millions of these. So GLP-1s are synthetic chemicals that act like glucagon, and they land on this receptor and activate it. And then the third part of any system that I started on is there's usually enzymes that activate and deactivate. But there's always upstream and downstream impacts of when you supplement. For instance, an easy example is there's a lot of people doing hormone replacement treatment. So if you're doing hormone replacement, as a male, I do I'm a 63-year-old male. When I'm not doing hormone replacement, my testosterone levels drop to just darn near nothing. And I know it because I get sore. I'm sore all the time. A cardio workout, I get sore from a cardio workout like I normally, with strength. But when I'm supplementing testosterone, I don't get that. Okay, the testosterone circulating, it's able to trigger the receptors. It lands on the androgen receptors in the muscles and does what it's supposed to do. Now, what's the downside of that? Well, when you have artificially high testosterone levels from supplementation, your normal system is not running. So up in your hypothalamus, it produces two little hormones called LH, luteinizing hormone, and FSH, follicle stimulating hormone. Now, these sound like female hormones, but they work on your gonads. One causes you to produce spermatogenesis. The other causes you to produce testosterone. Well, if you have artificially high testosterone, you'll have a drop in LH and FSH. Now, I'm not trying to make babies anymore. Okay. My wife and I, again, we talked about in our earlier podcasts, first, third, second, third.
Yeah.
You make babies in your second, third. You raise grandkids in your third. That's what you go for there. So I'm not trying to make babies anymore. So I don't care about spermatogenesis. So it's easy for me just to supplement testosterone. So that would be an example of supplementing a hormone to get a behavior. Well, GLP-1s are a similar process. We're adding this glucagon-like protein into our system. What it does is it causes your pancreas to release insulin. It slows gastric emptying. It makes you feel fuller. So you eat less. And at the end of the day, when you eat less, you wind up losing body fat. Now, the challenge, and we'll talk about this more as we go, well, you can lose more than just body fat. People who are using GLP-1s really need to pay attention to that. But that's what it is. And what's at a practical level, Klaudia, GLP-1s are delivering on the promise that the fitness industry failed to deliver on. I'm a person who's been working in the fitness industry since 1986. I took my first job running a health club in Columbus, Ohio in 1986. And we've promised, if you work out, you'll lose weight, you'll get strong, you'll do yada, 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 yada. We've not delivered on as an industry. It has failed repeatedly.
Yeah, I mean, just look at the numbers in terms of obesity. By 2050,
absolutely.
they're predicting to have skyrocketing numbers, which is scary.
Well, and so let's move up to 30,000 feet, which I like to do on this podcast. Yes. Let's move up and look at this. So why are we struggling with this? Well, our environment, again, genetics and environment. For me, this is where it all goes back to. What are your genetics and what is your environment? Our genetics are to gorge when we feed and don't move. An author that I really respect, I call him a friend. We've only conversed via email, but Rob Wolf wrote a book a while back called Wired to Eat. And our genetics are designed that when we feed, we gorge. And where this comes from is back when we were hunter-gatherers, we didn't necessarily have food all the time. So when we had a chance to eat, you really packed it in. And the other side of this is that in order to eat, you had to move. You had to go gather food. You had to go hunt food. And you usually went hunting when you were hungry. Hunger drove this process. In an earlier podcast, we talked about ketones. Well, when you're digesting fat and your ketones are climbing, you get sharp. It affects your brain. And so you'd get food, you'd gorge, and you go lay up. Okay, because you're that's all you need to do. You go lay up and mate. That was the two things: get food and breathe. But now we live in a time when food is available 24/7, 365. We don't have a problem, but we still have the genetics to, and we've actually flipped the script. We exercise too many times out of guilt. We gorge, and it should be reversed. You should be out exercising hard, long or hard, or both. Then at the end of that, you feed, and then you start to get the recovery. So it's this mismatch between our environment and our genetics. And so we have brains in our skulls that we can use, hopefully, for, as my mom said, use that head for something other than a hat rack. We can use our brains to figure this out. And so the question is, does the technology of the GLP-1, can it be an effective counteraction to the massive change in our environment that we're living in today versus where we were, where our genetics took place, a million years ago?
I mean, honestly, it fits into our environment and what our brain is hungry for nowadays, which is quick fix. I want to think of it. I want to have it. Whether it's ordering food, finding a partner, going from A to B, you want to put the order in, or even just Amazon, and I want it here by the afternoon. And if it takes 2 days, it's way too long. And we can come to that the same way with weight loss. For years, the industry has tried to find a way to promise the quick fix and the easy fix. I mean, I always say that as a person, I prefer choosing quality over convenience. Now, the majority of people may not be this way. They want easy, convenient, and let me not get up from the couch and still lose weight. And that's what GLP-1s have really delivered on, with a lot of downsides, because a lot happens when you are not moving.
We have to be really careful. Yeah, we have to be really careful about that. And I don't know if we want to go into this right now, but listen, I am a pro GLP-1 person. I believe these are an outstanding, they are an outstanding technology. One of our mutual respects, one of the people is Scott Galloway. In fact, we modeled this podcast over Scott and Kara Swisher's podcast. But Scott Galloway, I heard him say one time, what is the technology? In this technology, because he's a technology investor and works in this space. He talks about, even with all of the AI, and AI is massive. It is absolutely massive right now. Scott Galloway said he thinks GLP-1s are the single biggest technological development in this last decade, even compared to AI, which is a huge statement, right? Because you're right. The cost of illness, morbidity, the cost of morbidity is huge. And for our listeners, the 90% Healthy podcast listener, we assume you're trying to compress that morbidity curve. We assume, Klaudia, we're not going to live forever. In fact, everyone's talking about when to live to 120 or 150.
Johnson agrees with that.
Well, that's a whole nother conversation. Maybe his ego will live forever, but I'm not sure the body will make it. But the thing about this is the challenge of, I want to be well the entire time I'm alive. I want my morbidity to match up against my mortality. Most people, on the average time of death in this country is 73 years. That's the average time of death, or length of longevity. The average onset of morbid disease is 62. Okay?
So you're living with disease for 10 years. Fun.
You're living with a disease for 11 years that is going to do nothing but put a vacuum cleaner in your pocket and suck up everything that you worked for up until that point. And too many times, listen, we're seeing, do I think GLP-1s are a much better alternative to dialysis clinics? Well, hell yes. Okay. Do I think GLP-1s can be outstanding alternatives to diabetic amputation? Absolutely. And, so from a technology standpoint, they're ridiculously effective in that we have to look at that. Now, I've used GLP-1s. I am a insulin resistant, diagnosed as a type 2 diabetic. Those are my genetics. They express themselves in this environment we're in. I have to have a very rigid exercise and diet program to be good. Okay? Because eating crappy and not moving enough hits me faster than it does most people. So that's life. That's what I have to do. Thank goodness I'm in this industry and I have the awareness, but we have to pay attention to that. It's not a cure-all. It is a nice addition. It is a nice tool. And I think over the podcast today, we're going to talk about how can we use it as a tool in our arsenal of being 90% healthy.
Yes, I like that you brought it up, that it is a tool and it's not a be-all, what's the saying?
Be-all, end-all.
Be-all, end-all
yeah.
of the solution that we all wanted to have. But it comes in handy, and a lot more research is coming out. Obviously, there's still a lot of gaps in long-term understanding of its impact, but there's a lot of research comes out of its potential benefits that goes beyond just weight loss. And before we tap into some of the downsides and how to utilize it correctly, I did want to talk a little bit about what you have read recently as well, how it could help with addiction. There was a study that came out recently, how it showed potential benefits for people who have addiction toward alcohol. Like they were found to drink less, crave it less. So how does that happen? Where does it go back to? I mean, there is an understanding that I wanted to point out that it does something to your dopamine receptors and how much you are craving something, not from a gut perspective, but from a brain perspective.
Well,
there's a difference.
Klaudia, you can't separate those two. The gut and the brain are intimately linked.
Yes.
And this is, and as now, when it comes to understanding the gut, let's put this in perspective. Okay. The DNA that is sitting there in your shoes, okay, roughly 3% of it came from your parents. 97% of the DNA is in your gut. The DNA diversity is in your gut, and it changes based on habits. It changes based on environment. And you're really beginning to understand that this is a real thing. We have to pay attention to it. But our ability to say, eat this, not that, take this, not that, is still very nascent. It's very, very young. I think this will turn when we decoded the human genome, this was a project that started back in the 90s, And we learned so much about genetics that we're going to start to be able to decode the gut biome, genome. And as we learn more about that, but we are so early in this process, it's ridiculous. We know it's important. We know it's important. It's important to take a step back and feed on the foods that we evolved to eat, which just is real food. Okay.
Yeah.
We talked in an earlier podcast about just eating real food. And if you're reading nutritional boxes on a label, you're probably, you've missed the mark. Buy food that doesn't have a nutritional label. But, this is the challenge. So that gut brain, well, what we learned from the GLP-1s is that the same way we have satiation of appetite through the slow gut emptying, well, it looks like that's feeding up to the brain. And this link is just absolutely tight. It's dynamic. And so this is where we go back to. And we're starting to realize, maybe this is helping with other things besides just losing fat.
Yeah. And before I want to jump into some of the downstream impact that could happen, I wanted to address something that I may be off on this one. Not a scientist, just a journalist. I'm kind of adding it a bit together, but I did want to, I wanted to ask for your opinion on this. So a lot that the GLP-1 drugs are addressing, obviously, it's that decreasing appetite, decreasing your cravings, and initially, because you're eating less, you're consuming less calories, you're losing weight. Now, we talked about in the previous podcast about insulin resistance, how the best way to regulate your insulin and your glucose is to give insulin a break, give your body a break from eating. Now, GLP-1 drugs help you do that. So as part of regulating your insulin and rebalancing that insulin sensitivity within your cells, there's a lot of upstream effects that will help you think better, potentially use fat for fuel better. It can help recalibrate those dopamine receptors, the brain, how your brain consumes energy. So I think, personal opinion, at the root of a lot of things that GLP-1 drugs do, I think insulin resistance and addressing the insulin sensitivity of each individual is a huge piece of that puzzle to have all those potential benefits, from weight loss to clearer mind to less addiction to better sleep, better gut health. Because insulin resistance is at the root of a lot of those chronic conditions that we're dealing with and that are killing us. So it's addressing one of those root causes, not directly, but indirectly, because you're not eating, you're giving your body a break.
Yeah. And again, let's go back to using the product as a tool, not as a solution.
Yes.
Okay. Because we know if Amish don't struggle with insulin resistance and a lot of the diseases that we deal with, mainly because they walk more, they ride bikes, they work. Now, the Amish community is transitioning right now. They're eating shittier food. They're doing things. They're not working like they've always worked. And they're starting to deal with the diseases of the English, as they would say. But we have very good Amish friends back in Ohio, and when we're around them, it reminds me of how I grew up as a kid. I grew up on a big farm in eastern Ohio. It was a big beef cattle operation. And Klaudia, literally from daylight to dark, you're out working. In the summertime, you're on the idiot end of a hay baler for days on end. I am never happier than when I'm sitting listening to a thunderstorm come in and I smell the ozone in the air from a good thunderstorm, because, back on the farm, that was usually one of the first times I was taking a break. Okay. And I get happy. I mean, that affects me, Well, if you watch Yellowstone, I mean, I love season 5 of Yellowstone when they're doing the scenes on when they're they're branding and vaccinating and doing the cattle. Now, we didn't do the head or healer kind of stuff with the horses. We had a different system, but we were wrestling calves all day for 3 days. And then you're out. I mean, the work that we didn't have insulin resistant issues back then because our workloads were so high.
Yeah. Your body was moving.
Our body was
engaging
moving.
Your muscles.
We were engaging our genetics. That's the thing. We don't have to do that anymore. I tell the story that I went to grad school so I didn't have to bale hay in the summertime anymore. And now, as I move into my third, I'm like, well, maybe baling hay wasn't so bad. Maybe I need to, my wife and I are actually looking for a new piece of property right now. And we're liable to wind up on a little farm somewhere where to live, you have to do these things.
Yes.
So back to environment, genetics. Our environment is such that we don't have to work for food. We don't have to do physical effort to work. But that doesn't change the fact that our genetics need physical activity, physical movement, physical work in order to express themselves. If they're not expressing themselves, it's going to lead to disease. So, and this is what's so important about that. And again, GLP-1s are a nice tool in this environment that we're living in, but they are not the answer, okay? They're not 100% the answer. We have to constantly take a step back, look at our genetics, look at our practices, our habits, and make sure and keep those in place as we work our way through life.
And you talked about, obviously, having the importance of moving and activity. And I want to talk a lot about how to use them correctly. But before that, I do want to say, and it's been talked about quite a bit now, that 40% of the lost weight is lean or could be lean mass, which is absolutely key to longevity and just for you to be able to move through life events like we've talked about. And losing that lean mass, 40% of it. Now imagine if you lose X amount of weight. Let's say you lose 100 pounds. 40 pounds of that is lean muscle. 60 pounds of that is fat. Now within a year, over 60% of people regain that weight that they lose with GLP-1 drugs. I bet you majority of that, if not 100% of that weight, is going to be fat, because lean mass is a lot harder to put back on than fat mass. And if you're not exercising, you're just really digging yourself into a deeper hole.
There's the key. You have to have, this reminds me a lot of the gastric bypass craze, 20, 30 years ago. And everyone was looking at that as a silver bullet. You go in, you get your stomach stapled, whatever. Well, what we found is that it's not, is that there is a rapid weight loss. The problem is that without the change of habits, you're going to figure out how to get those calories in. Klaudia, we are an animal. We have the genetics to move. And that's a period, end of story statement. Okay? We have to move. The more you move, the healthier you'll be. The less you move, the more dis-ease you'll introduce into your system. And we can't avoid that, okay? Now, every minute of every day, a person in the United States falls. That fall eventually leads to death within 3 months. Okay? That's a huge number, okay? So how do you prevent falling? Well, the reason most people fall as they get older, they lose strength. You lose strength because you've lost muscle. You're not engaged in the process. And Klaudia, it was really interesting. I just went through this with my mother. It's now been almost 14 years ago. She and my father had moved to where they were living out in Sun City, Arizona, out by Phoenix for half of the year. And they'd come back to Ohio for half of the year. And my father passed away about 15 years ago. And my wife and daughter and I flew out to Phoenix for Christmas with my mother one year. And my mother, Klaudia, was the strongest woman I ever knew in my life. She was unbelievable. I watched her, my brother mouthed off to her one time, and she turned on him with a right hook and put him out. Okay. Boy. And this guy is a Division I wrestler at the time. Okay? So my mother was unbelievable. She was unbelievably strong. Now, I fly out to Phoenix, and all of a sudden I see my mom starting to hunch over. I see her starting to, and so they move into this community, this elder community, and this elder community they do really good with death. They're prepared to deal with death because there's so much death in that community.
Yeah.
And I said to my mom, I go, Mom, you've got to start lifting weights. You have got to start. And she did. Credit to my mom, she did. All of a sudden you saw her pick back up. And this is a woman, when my father passed away now 15, 18 years ago now, my mother was diagnosed with breast cancer within a month after my dad passed. She goes in and has a mastectomy. We go visit her hospital, and she is swinging off the rack in the bed, like, get me out of here. You know, it was crazy. She deals with this cancer for nearly 15 years. But we lost her 4 years ago. The cancer came back, and it came back hard, and she was just done. So she went in hospice. But I watched my mother, to kind of try and shorten the story a little bit. I watched my mother deal with this. I watched her. Now, cancer took her in the end. She didn't fall. She didn't have that. She was sharp as a tack. I mean, very, very cognizantly, just solid as a rock. And I kind of feel like my mom had a pretty good death. Her morbidity and her mortality were pretty tight. And frankly, I'm kind of what I'm going for. It's what I long for. And I think so. You have to have strength to survive, or else you're going to fall, break a bone, throw a clot, and die. Data is very clear on this. And if you're following the GLP only pathway, or if you follow the gastric bypass only pathway, if you try and do this, lose weight without exercise, strength training, you're putting yourself on a path to dying from a fall. Okay? Now, I hope I die from a fall. I hope that fall is off the edge of the Grand Canyon and I have a good ride all the way down. I want it to be a good fall.
Yeah.
But I don't want to trip over a curb, crack a pelvis, throw a clot, and spend 3 months in the hospital, again, with a vacuum cleaner in my pocket, sucking up every dime I ever put aside. That's not what I'm going for.
And I want to add to the fall problem where it's not, and doesn't become a huge problem if you had strong bones to begin with. And something we haven't talked about is that rapid weight loss often results in not only lean mass loss, but also bone density loss. And it's especially a growing concern for the aging population who already may deal with osteoporosis and women who are going through menopause. It's clear that once you hit menopause, women start to lose not only muscle mass faster, but also bone density. And those two go hand in hand when it comes to a fall becoming a lot more than just a trip over your
But it's not
shoes.
the menopause. Remember,
It's what happens throughout menopause.
Yeah, correlation is not causation.
Yes.
When my mother passed, she had a bone density scan the year before that. She was 6 standard deviations to the right of the mean. My mother had no issues with osteoporosis. Mainly because, again, we grew up on a farm. I can't express to you the amount of work that you go through when you do this. But what's the benefit? The benefit is that you get stronger, both bones and muscles. And what we know is that when we lower dietary intake of nutrients, the body's going to get what it needs. It's either going to break down proteins to get the amino acids that it needs to do the work, or it's going to go into your bones and it's going to pull out calcium and minerals to get what it needs. Calcium is so important in the activity of nerves and the activity of muscles. The body's going to get it one way or the other. It's going to get it. So it's either going to go suck it out of yours or it's going to get it out of your diet. And that's why this balanced diet with the right, don't worry too much about proteins, fats, and carbohydrates. I think we overemphasize that. But in a longevity standpoint, you need to start paying attention. What are the micronutrients? What is, are we getting all those?
Minerals.
I was checking out at the grocery store 2 days ago, and I'm wearing this. I happen to be wearing this quarter zip, and the guy says, "Tell me what Train, Recover, Win is." I said, "Well, that's my website. It's what I do. I'm an exercise physiologist and sports scientist." And he starts telling me about his mother who had fallen. I said, "Interesting." He said, "What do you do?" I said, "She's got to get stronger. You got to get her in physical therapy. You've got to do these things." He says, "So I'm 40. When should I start worrying about it?" I go, "Now." I go, "The work you do now is what you're banking this strength and this bone density for when you're 80. That's what
you're preloading your system.
Yeah, you're banking it. So again, for our listener, the reason you show up at the gym is not big biceps. The reason you show up at the gym is to do the work so that you're able to move better. And again, all that lean mass, it's sucking the insulin out of your blood. Okay, that's a good thing. You're not going to develop resistance if you're metabolically sucking this stuff out of your system. So that, and by the way, you're building bone density and you're doing all those things so that when you do go through menopause, you do so. And again, for females listening to this, get if you're premenopausal, there's a test you can go get done called a Dutch test, okay, which is a hormone assessment. If you can get that done premenopausal, it's gold, okay? Now, not all docs get this. You may need to go to a functional medicine doc to get this, but once you go through menopause, we can really effectively prescribe either transdermal or injectable hormones to return you back to that same hormone profile. Quality of life is improved ridiculously high. I mean, it's ridiculous how much benefit comes from that. So, so this is that comprehensive thing. So we're kind of off GLP-1s. Maybe we need to work our way back.
We will, but I do want to tell a story because your mother's story reminded me of my grandma's story because she grew up in a small town in Hungary and has been active her whole life, rode a bicycle up until she was in her 80s,
Right.
And she's fallen plenty of times. I mean, she's fallen off the bike. Not ever she would break a bone. And it was because of the quality. She was eating real food. She was not like, lifting weights like we do in the gym, but she was doing something active every day, carrying stuff. She was always doing things. When I first started when I was born in my early teens, she was, and then later on they sold it. But yeah, she was constantly doing active things, and those signs of aging that a lot of our elderlies deal with nowadays were not a case in her situation, So it was just very interesting that your story just reminded me and made me think of it, made me think of her that way. So it's very interesting.
Yeah, there's two sides. There's two sides that I describe balance as the ability to fall in any direction. Okay, we're going to fall. That. Okay, we're going to fall. I was out for a walk the other day with the dog. We're currently up in Sonoma County along what's called the Russian River. There's this path up there. I hit this spot. All of a sudden, I'm down in this ditch climbing out. It wasn't a problem for me. Okay, I had to go back and get my glasses that fell off my shirt. Well, when I got back to the house, I'm like, oh, where's my glasses? I'm like, I'll bet I dropped them right there. So balance is the ability to fall in any direction, and this is a product of strength. If you think standing and balancing is going to develop balance, you're probably kidding yourself. Maybe that's a start. Work with your physical therapist. But lifting weights solves so many problems. It is so effective. And frankly, if you go to the gym, it's going to be full of 20 to 35-year-olds or maybe 40-year-olds. I mean, that's who's going to be there. And it's typically an alternative to a bar. Where can I go? Meet people. There's a huge social aspect of gym life. The people who should be in the gym are not the 20 to 40-year-olds. It should be their parents and their grandparents. The effectiveness is sky high. It is ridiculously how effective it is for those populations. And I engage in this enough, and I am not for a minute saying that you won't need a GLP-1 or you won't need a hormone replacement or anything, because we cannot discount the effect of environment. It's dramatic, it's permanent, it's the way it is. But I don't want someone, I was talking to a gym person. This guy runs in the fitness industry, and he sent me his blood work. He was talking about what he's doing, and his testosterone levels were really low. And I'm like, dude, you got to go talk to a doctor about TRT. And he almost saw it as giving up or as cheating. And GLP-1s can be, I don't want to do a GLP-1. I feel like I'm cheating. Get over that. Okay.
Yeah.
Use the tool because the environment is powerful. And this has been a really effective tool in this process.
But use it the right way in strength training. And often a lot of people think if you're, 100 pounds overweight, or that you're going to have to go into the gym and lift your body weight. That's not the point. You could do, like, one of the things that I like to say to even women who are not into the whole idea of lifting heavy weights, increase time under tension. There's insane amount of engagement within your muscles if you just push more time under tension and build up resistance over time, because Klaudia, that also engages muscles.
Unfortunately, the industry confuses the layperson. and we think there's this ideal or this perfect. Here's what's ideal. Go through the effing door, okay? Get through the door of the facility. I don't care what the facility is, okay? It can be something in your condo association, but literally, as you accumulate trips through that door, I don't care what the work you do once you get in there, it will be beneficial. It comes so fast. Don't let perfect be the enemy of good here. Get your ass through the door.
Or just and that door can be your own front door, and get outside and go for a 30-minute walk. It seems so simple, yet for those who are not used to it, it could be a huge step. Every now and then I have the TV on, and there's the show called My 600-Pound Life or something like that.
Oh, that's brutal.
And it's brutal seeing individuals go through such pain and have no willpower to do what's right. And it's not their fault. There's so many things that are against what they need to do.
Okay, it is an absolute bullshit term. Again, and this isn't, we get too judgmental on this. They're lazy, they're sloth, or what. Shut the fuck up. Okay, that's what I want to say. Okay, be kind. This person has, and when we look at trauma, when we look at the things that people deal with, be kind. Start by being kind to someone and not judging them. Okay.
Yeah.
And assist. What's it take for assist? Get through the door. Okay. Help them get the habits put in place. And again, I'll tell you, I struggle with the 600-pound lives and the hoarding stuff. I mean, it disturbs me. I can't watch that for entertainment. But I've also had the experience. I'll tell you an interesting story here, and we're running a little bit long, but I think this really contributes.
Yes, I want to get it. Yeah, I know.
When I was running the Human Performance Lab back at Columbus State Community College, we're running this lab. We're doing this really cool work. I'm teaching all these kids to be personal trainers. I'm in my lab one day, and there's this woman is over at the door, and she looks at me and she waves me over. And I go over, and she's pretty heavy set. And I walk outside with her, and she says, listen, she says, I'm hearing some amazing things about your place. She says, I want your help, but I'm not coming in there when someone else is there. She was incredibly self-conscious. And I said, no problem. I said, we'll set up a time, start working with her. So we're 5-6 months into this, and she's doing great. She finally breaks, she gets through the fear thing. She gets through the embarrassment thing. Well, all of a sudden, Klaudia, she probably loses 30, 40 pounds over a period of 6-9 months, and she disappears. And I'm like, doesn't return my phone calls. And this is before cell phones and things like that. Doesn't return my phone calls. But I finally see her on campus one day. And I'm like, how are you doing? What's going on? She said, here's the problem. She said, my husband and I had not had relations for 5 years. She said, all of a sudden, I started feeling good about myself, and she got pregnant.
Oh.
You want to talk about throwing everything into it, and all the hormones and all the stuff there. And I'm like, oh my God. And it was kind of a little intimidating. They were not prepared for this. It was a huge effect on their life, but had the baby and everything went good. I said, okay, let's get back here and go on this. There's two sides to this. The other one, I was working with someone one time, and I think when someone is really, I think it's critical as an exercise professional, when you're working with a female that's, I guess a male would fit this too, who's very overset. A lot of time fat is armor. Okay. There has been trauma in their background. Okay. They had some, and when they're fat, they have armor to protect them from people pursuing them. Okay. We cannot forget this. We have to pay attention to this. And listen, that's not going to change with GLP-1s or gastric bypass or anything. Okay. That's still there. We're still traumatizing at a really high rate.
Yeah.
But as professionals, we need to have compassion. We need to understand that these people, and not be so fucking judgmental on this. And I probably, the reason I use the word is I'm trying to emphasize this. This is how important this is to me. Don't be judgmental, and just help these people move through. And that's what a GLP-1 does. It's just a little help.
It is a little help. And oftentimes we don't see the person behind that armor. And I think that's where I found myself, frankly, in the bucket too. I'm like, why can't they just do it? And there's so much mental health aspect of it, so much previous trauma that is, they need to shed that first. If they don't shed that, the pounds will always come back, I think.
Yeah, I'm not sure shed's the right word, but
Address
recognize
skill.
the fact.
Yeah.
Listen, I'm a huge advocate of a good counselor. And if this has happened in your background, listen, I've seen traumatic childhoods affect an athlete's ability to achieve All-American status as a goal. Okay. They have all the technical, tactical, physical skills they need. What they don't have is the psychological resiliency to do. I mean, they're physically there, but and literally the thing standing between them and their goal as one of the best wrestlers in the country needs to be solved with a good counselor based on trauma in their background. So I've seen both ends of this continuum. It is real. And so, as we're wrapping up here, GLP-1 is a tool. It is not a cure-all. It is not an end-all. You must have these other tools in there. And if you go back and listen to our podcast, you'll hear us talk about trainable life events. You'll hear us describe fitness as the physical capacity to enjoy the life you're given. Let's throw the scale away. Get rid of it, okay? Start to pay attention to the number of days you walk through the weight room door, the number of minutes you engage in exercise. And we can use really cool wearable technology to do this. And I think this is where success lies in a lot of this as our listeners tune into this.
And I would like to add one more tool into that toolbox that could fall into a very similar category as these GLP-1 drugs, which was my recent discovery. There's studies showing how the gut microbiome obviously is a huge aspect of your overall health. And the more diversity you have, the more vitality you will have. There's one specific probiotic that I have no affiliation here. I'm not going to mention a brand, but I wanted to point out this probiotic called Akkermansia municiphilia. I may be butchering it, but
look at the show notes.
It is a huge, not talked about enough probiotic, yet it's been found. Like, I looked up a bunch of research because I wanted to make sure that I cover this basis. And it has been found to be more abundant in individuals who are centenarians, individuals who are living longer. And it is something that decreases with age, and it acts it doesn't only protect your gut barrier, which is super important for your immune system health and overall vitality. I started to shed. I mean, I didn't have a lot of weights to lose. I just wanted to drop like 10 pounds, 8 pounds. And it literally, after those 2 months, once it's sort of cultured up in my gut, it's dropped. I have talked about this to a lot of my friends, including my best friend. I've talked about it to my mother, my sister-in-law. They've all got on it. It's not an expensive thing. Like, I pay like $30 for 3 months.
So for our listeners, okay, we have no relationship at this point in time with a company that promotes this. But tell people where you get yours. You've done the research. Where do you get yours?
It's through Amazon. I get it from Amazon. It's one of the Code Age brands, and it's just one thing you do in the morning on an empty stomach, and I swear, I promise, this has helped, and without any side effects. Obviously, personal experience. So I'm not saying this is going to work the same way for everybody because we're all different, but I've seen it work just within my circle. And because the more abundant this probiotic is in your gut, the healthier your sort of gut health is. And interestingly, obviously, you need to eat the real foods to feed the good bacteria in your gut.
That doesn't change.
That doesn't change, but this adds an additional tool if you can't potentially get on. I have one of my friends, she has thyroid cancer. She cannot get on GLP-1 drugs, and she struggles with losing weight. And I asked her, try this. So I think she started trying the past few weeks. So I'm curious to see what her experience is, but it is an additional tool, Akkermansia, to put in your toolbox. And a lot of people are starting to talk about it. It's also, again, something that needs more research, but it's promising. And
And listen, you and I will do a podcast episode on some of these longevity supplements. So whether it's spermidine or bermidine or whatever.
Yeah.
There's a ton of them. We'll continue to talk about that. If you, the listener, has questions, shoot us a note. Let us do some research for you. We'll give you some feedback. Listen, that's our job. That's what we do. That's why we wake up in the morning. So don't be afraid to ask. And along the way, if we come across a source that we think's good, we're going to do two things. Number one, we're going to figure out if we can get an affiliate code so that when you buy it, we get a little bit of benefit so we can pay for this podcast. But number two, we're going to recommend quality sources based on our experience. So if you see it, know that those two things are happening. And you can also trust the fact that just because someone throws some money at you does not mean we're going to take it and promote it. So that's really important. You'll start to hear advertisements pop up on our podcasts. We may even have some bolted into this one once it finally gets through production.
Yeah.
But know that everything that we talk about, we've put through a bit of a screen and we trust it. So we hope you can too.
I agree. Thank you so much, everybody, for listening in. I've got one challenge for you all. If you are doing, whether you are on GLP-1 or not, or just wanting to add some extra increasing strength in your schedule, I would challenge you to start doing more time under tension. That has made a huge difference for me. And you don't need to stack more weights on that barbell or stack more weights on anything. You just need to pulse a little bit in that low squat or hold that plank a little longer. And it will make a huge difference in your muscle strength, muscle health, bone density health, and all of the above. So 1% shifts at a time to get to that 90% healthy state, which is what we want to be at. Thank you so much for listening. Make sure to subscribe, comment, and let us know if you have any questions. And thanks,
Thanks,
Don.
everybody. Klaudia, have a great day.
Thanks, you too.
Bye-bye.